Hi, it is Lisa from Lisa's Paper Hearts. I wanted to show you a journal that I have recently completed. This is a quilt journal, and I actually bought some of this as a kit from Armorique Fabriques. She sells all kinds of cool fabrics, fabric pieces, doily pieces, all kinds of great things on Etsy. And she had these little hearts and this vintage quilt piece and some of the pages that you'll see inside, all as kind of a kit you could buy and put together. So I did. I made the hearts. She had the grommets in there, and I just strung some of this cool, I bought some spools of this, or many yards of it, this kind of, I don't know, sari fabric or something that somebody made into these kind of tie ribbons. You can see the journal also has these vintage buttons on the spine. I just got those. I've collected them over time. Some I might have gotten from Armorique Fabriques. There's Bill the Button Guy on Etsy. I've gotten buttons from, and also just estate sales and things. So this was just some buttons that I thought kind of matched the fabric of the quilt. I also had some distressed lace I attached on there at the top and a kind of different style on the bottom, just because the journal got, as I was doing pages, I could tell it was getting big, and I wanted to make sure I could kind of hide some of the hangover pieces. This is another piece of vintage quilt that I put inside with the small squares. And this is some distressed lace that I made pockets out of, that I got from Kelly Snow from Bygone's Variety Shop, also on Etsy. So lots of little Etsy pieces in here. And in the pocket I just had this distressed piece of paper, and then I had this envelope. This is one of the magazine pages that came with the quilt. Right, and just made some little kind of stuffing pieces to put in there. Right, that kind of matched. This on this side is the paper that you find in the sewing pattern. So this is pattern paper, and just kind of covered it on there so you could write on it a little bit. There's matte medium over the top of it, just to help it kind of stay down and probably hold ink and whatever a little bit better. All right, so I'll put that back in the little envelope I made here. I like to put a little notch in there. I think it makes it easier to get things in and out. So put that back in there. It's a magazine page. This is some scrapbook paper. These little squares, you'll see them throughout. That was two-sided. I just thought that was cool. It kind of gave it a quilty feel. Hung over a little more than I liked, but it's all right. Once you commit to it, you have to kind of stick with it. Quilt magazine. This is dyed paper, again, from Bygone's Variety Shop. Any of these quilt ones came with it. This is, I think, kind of cool. So this is a quilt piece that I made into a fold-out. And then on this side, I glued it in, but just on the corners. So it is a pocket, and there's a little journal card inside there. This is a piece of vintage quilt I got from somebody else on Etsy. I can't remember her name, but I have a whole bunch of these vintage quilts of various sizes. I think I cut this one down. Just put some little tulle on there, sewed it onto this page, made it into a flip. Because some of these, like the magazines, I have some sewing book, sewing instruction book pages in here. They're hard to really write on. So I put some things over it, or things like this where there's a flip up and you can see some of the things underneath. Like that. This is actually, I didn't put anything in here, but this is actually a belly band. More quilting, right? So again, a lot of words, you can't really write on that, but I put a card over the top. This is some dyed wrapping paper, vintage wrapping paper. This, I love making these clips, I have to tell you. Aside from covers, the other thing I'm probably addicted to making are the dang clips. I did a video not too long ago, maybe a couple months, on clips I made for a different journal. So here's the vintage quilt piece, right? Just some layering fabric. I sewed a button on. I put a little safety pin on here. This is just a nice little coffee dyed piece of paper. I just kind of clipped on. I made this side clip instead of a top clip. I usually make more top ones, but I'm trying to remember to make side ones too. All right, so that's just kind of cute and fun. And then on this side, I actually had clipped in here. This is from that sewing instruction book, right? I didn't even make a place to write on that one. I just thought it was kind of cool and fun to take on and off. This is dyed paper. This is that sewing, again, to cover up that instruction page. There's plenty of blank on this one, which I like. This one, actually, I think the Armorique fabrics, like some of them came with this like cool spiny stuff on, which I left on because I just like the texture of it. Here I put some gesso to kind of dab down the writing so you could write over the top of it, or someone could write over the top. Right here's the sewing pattern. You can really see the pattern on that pattern paper. Some more of these squares. These were in one of the quilting magazines. I just cut them out and added them on. And here's a little button. Another vintage button. You'll see a couple of those throughout. Right, another flip up. This is ribbon again that I just distressed. Here's another clip. Love the clips. This, I really tried to bring in kind of the essence of the quilting. I don't know if you can see these threads on here. I think you can. If I get a little closer. All right, so I tried to put some thread behind there too to really give it that quilty feel. Sort of just a bunch of little pieces together. There's ribbon. This is a ribbon as well that I sewed down. This is a piece of that vintage quilt. And just some dyed paper. This is actually, I don't remember who on Etsy. This is digital print. But I can't remember who on Etsy I got it from. I do a lot of digital prints off of Etsy. It's a great place to go for those, I think. This little envelope is actually from, I don't know, Temu or one of those places. I put the magnet in there just to help it close. And actually in my work on some of the putting together the journal, I had this extra bias tape wrapper and I just liked it. I just thought it was cool. I had this kind of vintage sewy look to it. I had this little scrap of paper left over from making a tag or something. So I thought it looked cool, kind of hanging out of the window. All right, just put it in there. There you go. This is from a different journal printout, and I used some sparkly, what do you call these? These kind of sparkly brush marker things to kind of color it. Just made it into a pocket. I put a tab on there because what I actually accidentally had done when I was making the holes to put the buttons on, I had actually poked through more pages than I thought I did. So I tried to cover up some of the holes. This is just some like washi tape. There's another little flip up. Here we go. Here's another vintage button. This one I think is really cool. Very vintage looking. This is one of the things I like to do too when I get some of these fabrics or vintage things is scan them. So then I could use them, carry that pattern throughout. So this is a vintage quilt that I just scanned, made into paper. Right, this was a different scan on the other side, and then I used a stencil to kind of make the vintagey dots on there. This is like a bedspread quilt from a magazine that I was just clipping in. Here's another one of the dang clips I love to make. Right, this has 2 buttons on it. This is a kind of a clear vintage one. I even did some stitching, blanket stitch, I think that is, a kind of a sloppy blanket stitch, because I was going to do it before, forgot to do it, made the clip, and then was like, oh, I was going to do this blanket stitching. So it was a little bit tricky because I blanket stitched it while it was already on the clip and all put together. But I made it work. And I think I'd actually also put this magazine or newspaper, whatever it was upside down. This is actually from a master board that I made. So I take big pieces of grocery bag and cover them with, different pieces of scraps of paper and things like that, and just make a big master board that you can use for a variety of things, including like the backs of these clips. This was a magazine piece, and you'll see the other half of this on the other half of this signature a little bit later. It had like, I don't know, some logo or brand or something in here, and I just cut that out, and I thought it made a great like pocket opening. So I made it into that, sewed it in, glued it down. This is a scan of some Tim Holtz fabric. I just put in there because I thought Had a very quilty feel. I again love to scan the fabrics just to kind of distress out and use. This is extra scrap of paper. This is the sewing book gessoed. Here is a piece of, you know, those old rulers that are wood that kind of open and close. You click, click, click them open and then click, click, click them shut. I think they're like yardsticks or whatever. I bought some pieces that had holes drilled on Etsy, and I've bought them a long time ago, sadly, and hadn't used them. And I was like, you know what would be perfect for this quilting journal would be these. So I have a couple of those in there too. There's another tab from a hole I accidentally cut. Here was a page I made and a tag that matches it. So this is from that magazine as well. There's like some other stuff that I just didn't really like, but I made it into a nice little tuck pocket. And then I made a matching tag to go in it, just at the back, so it could right in the back. There's some Cantha scrap fabric here, a little piece of lace. I sewed it. I put a pin. This is another little vintage button. It's a vintage rose button that I think is super cool. Doesn't go in the pocket the best, but it makes the journal really thick. There's a couple of these thicker buttons in here. Here's another thing I like to do, just these little flippy pieces, right? Again, because you can't write on this. So I made this into something where you potentially could, using just some leftover scrap pieces of random pieces of paper that I've had. I have like a sewing and fashion stencil, so I did a little stenciling with, I think this is gold gesso. Didn't turn out the best, but it's all right. Here's another piece of vintage quilt that I sewed into a little flip-up set. This is from a magazine. It was real new and shiny, so I had to distress that too, otherwise it was just too kind of white. Right, some more gesso page. Here's that other side of that that I got from Etsy, that printout. Some more quilt page. Here's another vintage button, kind of a pearly one. And here's another amazing clip. This just cardstock. This is again some vintage quilt. I did some blanket stitch on just half of it, just this piece kind of here, because I thought it popped out. 2 vintage buttons on there. Just some little pieces of like Cantha strips and just kind of random little fabric pieces that I had. And then another one of these little magazine or sewing instruction book things that I just thought were kind of fun to clip in. Here's a flip up that I sewed in. Some more of that sewing pattern paper. This is the center. I thought this was gorgeous, so I wanted this to be the middle of the journal. And here in the signature that I tied, I put a kind of dangly button on here that hangs down. There's another little flip up. Right, this was printed paper. Again, used some stenciling to make it a little more vintage. Here's a clear kind of, what do we call that, holographic button. Vintage here. This was from, I think, a magazine or something that I cut out, like an old one with a lady sewing. And another nice tag that goes in there. Here on the other side, is that the other side? Yep. Here's another clip. This is just a piece of paper I clipped in. Some more vintage quilt. This is just this kind of extra lace piece, right? Some vintage buttons. This button I actually put on this safety pin here. Some little lace trim, all kinds of cute things. Like I said, these, and this one also has that like stray fabrics or stray thread. I just love making the dang clips. I could just make those. Comes another one of the measuring tape pieces. This one is more white. The other one was more of a brown. I liked this, so I didn't want to just over the top of it. A pressing problem. I thought that was fun just to have on the page. Here's the other side of that magazine that had the logo that I cut out. Here I made a little kind of flip up. This was some coffee dyed paper I got from Bygones Variety Shop as well. This, I think, is washi that I put on the top. So I had something a little bit stronger to kind of sew it all together with. That wasn't going to just like rip up the paper. It just fits in here. I was super excited when I goes in here this that way when I found that that paper fit. Here's another vintage button. This is just sewn in. This is some of that seam binding, thick seam binding. And some loose threads in there that I thought were fun. On this side, the binding actually flips up, and there's a flip inside, which I thought was fun. Here's that scanned quilt piece again. Here's another, there'll be a clip on the other side here. Here's another vintage magazine piece. A little envelope I made with some of the leftover magazine. You can see some of the quilting instructions in there. This is a quilt piece, or quilt magazine piece I didn't really necessarily like. I did some gesso. Put that sewing paper on the other side. Stuck right on it. Put in the envelope. Put that in there. Flip it over, and then here's the clip. This is another side one. Some coffee dyed paper. This I think was a piece of ribbon. And here's the quilt underneath. You can see like literally just threadbare. These things are so cool. These are some samples of scrapbook paper I had gotten once upon a time that I thought would be great to kind of use up in here. Oh, sorry, that's my dog going crazy. This was another magazine. It was mostly words. And I didn't find it that interesting, so I made it into this cool pocket, and then I drew these little hand stitchings on there. This quilt page I wasn't super fond of. It's like, I don't know, kids' bibs, whatever. But I put some of these quilt things inside. Right, and then it goes really nice into there. This was... It's a little sticky. This way? This way. I don't know. This way, I guess. It's a cherry, maybe. This was in the magazine. And there's lots of other stuff around it, but I liked that, so I cut that out. Put that in here. Journal card. In the front, this is actually a tiny pocket, too. I'll put a ticket or a tag or something in there. I haven't done it yet. This is another scanned quilt piece that I cut out and made it into more of a flip. Here is actually a tag. It's just a piece of scrapbook paper. You saw, I think, this paper somewhere else in here earlier. This is this kind of big ribbon I sewed down. Right, so just kind of sewed those things together. I thought it went nice with the quilt that's on the back here. Here's another little flip up. This is washi. I think this is Tim Holtz washi. I did some stencil gold gesso on here. There's just some loose threads in here again to give it that whole like sewing feel. These are from one of the magazines too that I cut out. Here's another one of these pockets with a matching tag. A big button with another vintage, or a big pin with another vintage button on it. Here's some extra. I think the other piece of that was on one of the covers I showed earlier. All right, again, that doesn't go in the pocket the very best because of the button, but that's okay. This is some scrap fabric. This was a printout from that same Etsy store. Just made it into a quick tag, nice and flat. That one is easy. You can write in the back of it. Here's another vintage button. Here's the other side of that fabric, some seam binding, another little envelope I made with some of the magazine paper that I didn't necessarily like all of. Here's a little flip up I made. Some of my other flips, they kind of flip here. This one I made so it flipped right lower here. Right, and I think this opens really nice and flat. Another, again, quilt piece that I cut out of the magazine. And here's the back cover. This is from that tea-dyed cardstock. Just put some spare lace on it. This is just from actually an art journal that was too fat. I pulled a bunch of the pages out, but always nice to have some extra blank paper. That quilt, vintage quilt again with the squares and the back. So that's it. Thanks for watching my walkthrough.